And to kick our conversation off this hour, I'm joined by Deven Ghelani, Director of Policy in Practice, who was one of the architects of the Universal Credit Welfare System. Mr. Ghelani, it's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. First of all, I mean, in terms of the findings of this Joseph Rowntree Foundation study, do you believe the conclusions that things out there are not just bad, but are bad at record levels? Good evening to you.
Yeah, good evening. So I do believe them. It's something that we've seen growing, particularly over the last decade. Things have been difficult for a really long time for a lot of people, particularly those on the lowest income. So I think a lot of people have been protected and shielded from some of these challenges, particularly if you've been able to stay in work. But what the numbers show is that if we talk about two numbers, really, the number of households in poverty, which I think people do challenge because it's a measure, it's a line, it's your relative income relative to other people. So if more people become better off, then more people can be in poverty. People challenge that. But I think what this study says, and it's really important, is that half of those people who are in poverty are genuinely struggling to make those pay their bills effectively from month to month. You talked about heating and eating, but it's also things like council tax. It's also things like fuel to get around, we heard about bus fares being capped today, which I think will come as a welcome relief, but it's also being able to just take part in society. And I think for a lot of people, losing out on some of those essentials, one, it just makes life a little bit less bearable. I think doing things to kind of make life more bearable, more enjoyable for people is just something we should be doing, but also has real consequences. So particularly if you think about families with children, if they are going to school hungry, it has implications for their ability to learn. It has implications for other children in their classroom as well, because it can have knock-on impacts and implications. For older people, it can lead to them not getting out and about as much, being more socially isolated for longer, which can have, again, implications for their health, which costs everyone and costs society quite a lot more than if we just made sure people were housed, fed, kept warm as a basic necessity.
I mean, I know we're only into the third day of Andy Burnham's premiership. He's announced that £2 cap on bus fares that you referenced. There's VAT relief on electricity bills that's going to save the average household £45 a year. But as one of our listeners was pointing out earlier in the evening, that is 79p a week, 79 pence a week. I mean, that's not going to come close to alleviating the difficulties that this new survey has revealed today.
No, and I think there are a lot of people who work in our sector saying actually the support should be much more targeted toward people on lower incomes. I actually disagree. I think in that first statement, Andy Burnham's done two things. One, he's done sort of the anti-winter fuel payment. There's support there for everyone, which I think is a really important message. This isn't about one group versus another. It's about everyone getting some money off their bills. And there's a niche policy point here, which is making electricity cheaper relative to other fuels is actually really good for the economy. It means that we can, we're going to decarbonize a little bit faster, which again is something that the government wants. And it does send a signal that actually you should be electrifying things, and that actually makes the country greener. So not everything is about being super targeted. There are other ways to target support to people, not least through the social security system itself, where we've seen, for the first time, and to the government's credit, the first above inflation increase in the level of universal credit, which had been frozen at various points over the last decade. And that is what has been pushing a lot of families into poverty. And I think some of what the government's doing in terms of lifting that standard allowance, some of what it's doing to tackle child poverty is going to make a real difference to that level of support that was introduced under Keir Starmer is going to make a real difference to, and is much better targeted to those in poverty, whereas measures like taking VAT off energy need to be viewed as a mainstream measure, and you need a mix of both as the Prime Minister.
But you've also got to get people back into work. I mean, when you've got 16.2% youth unemployment, that can only further be supercharging the findings of studies like this one and making it even harder for families to make ends meet, because their children as they leave school, in some cases graduate from university. I mean, they're simply not able to go out and find the employment that they need to contribute not only to their families, but to the economy more broadly.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen a big drop-off in entry-level jobs, partly as a result, again, of the government's measures. So the government's done some good things on child poverty, but it's done some pretty challenging things. I know businesses are across the country would say they're struggling. You know, they've had to take a real hit on their margins, on their profitability, because of things like the increase in national insurance contributions that employers are expected to pay, things like the increase in the living wage, which are a very good idea in principle when the economy is buoyant. But actually what it's done at the moment is made it really hard particularly for entry-level jobs. So younger people, when they try and find their first job, are finding it harder. And particularly the more disadvantaged younger people are finding it even harder still, because the further away you are from the labour market, the harder it is to get that first job.
Is there a vicious circle here in these findings, in that people that may already be living on benefits largely then go out and seek more opportunities from benefits that they can turn to in order to make ends meet, intensifying the benefits crisis that the country faces?
It's a great question. I think part of it is the framing of it. So you can view it as a vicious cycle. I prefer to view it as a virtuous cycle. So I think if you can get people the support they need to get more stabilized financially, that often gives them the platform they need to be active, as I said, be socially active much more, which can help them to get that first job, can help them to make the connections they need to get into that first level of employment. What I saw over the last decade, again, working on the front line as money was being taken away from people, was a lot of people going back into their shell, getting, if they lost their job, they were finding it harder to get out and about because they just didn't have the money. And I think sometimes it can be a real false economy to think that making cuts to social security, making cuts to benefits is cost-free, savings to the Treasury. Those costs often pop up elsewhere in councils' homelessness budgets, in councils' social care budgets, in schools' education budgets. And we need to really look at these things all together. As I said at the top of this conversation, if children are going to school hungry, they're not going to be able to learn as well. And I think in some respects, like if you think about the NEET crisis right now, I think we're starting to feel the consequences of cuts that were made a decade ago.
And some of our listeners question the findings of surveys like this one that came out today from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Mark has texted in to say they can't afford at least one essential because they're all gambling, betting, purchasing scratch cards, and funnily enough are still able to go on endless holidays. What do you say to listeners who question the choices that people are making themselves as they face financial hardship that results from income not keeping up with expenses?
There are definitely trade-offs and choices being made every day. You make them, I make them. I spend money well, I spend money badly, and I think you can be, people can be judgmental about that. I think what I've seen is a growing number of people finding themselves in serious financial difficulty because of circumstances outside of their control. Perhaps they've lost their job because the economy's been struggling, particularly where they live, or their benefits have been reduced, certainly either in reality or in real terms, which means as costs have gone up, they're struggling to make ends meet. And what I've seen actually I'd say some of the worst consequences is seeing a growing number of people falling into debt and not seeing a way out. And I think that has some serious negative consequences for their mental health, for the different organizations, the utility companies, the local authorities that are trying to get the money that they need to fund their services. And what I'd say to people who are struggling financially listening to your show is some research, policy and practice did £24 billion of support is going unclaimed each year. You can look for that. So if your utility company, your water company, your energy company is you're struggling to pay those bills, often those support schemes exist from those regulated organizations. Or you can go online, search for benefit calculators, fill in some information yourself, and see what support you might be able to get if you're struggling. Now, your listener might say, okay, people who get that money might make different choices. What I see on the front line is people genuinely struggling to make ends meet, not having the money to pay their bills, And I don't think it's that reasonable to be too judgmental about how people who have very little to live on, as we've seen, as we've seen from this study, it's focused on the lowest income households. It's 4,000 low income households who are being surveyed here. And what you're seeing is not just those in poverty, in terms of the poverty line, but genuinely not being able to stay in their home potentially, right? That's a worst case consequence, having to choose between heating and eating, as you said at the top of your show. So I'm seeing real consequences, either directly or through the partners and clients we work with.
And can I ask you finally, if Andy Burnham was sitting in this studio, I think he might argue that devolving power and resources to local authorities to address these issues more directly needs to be part of the answer to all of this. Do you buy that?
So firstly, I think Andy's made a great start, actually. Kind of, if you think about the first two measures, capping bus fares, capping electricity bills, they're going to help a lot of people in a lot of different ways. So I think that's probably the first point. On devolution, I think local authorities, we work with local authorities. We've seen them do some incredibly innovative things. One of the things we've seen them do is identify struggling families using the data that they hold. So we've helped them with that through a platform called Lift, Low Income Families, Low Income Family Tracker, and that's been used to identify people who are struggling financially and get the support they need to them proactively before they get into worse financial difficulties. So you're stopping the worst consequences, chasing them for money that they don't have, and ensuring that they're getting the support that they should be getting in the first place. So I'm seeing local authorities innovate, but I do get to see some of the, we tend to work with the better ones, I would argue. So we tend to work with those ones that are innovating, using information intelligently. I would like to see even more of that. I would like to see Andy give even more of the data that's held by central government to local authorities so they can start to innovate even more. I think when you try and do these things top down, central government has a tendency, I worked on universal credit. I saw how challenging that was for central government to implement. Ultimately, it did it well, but it was certainly a challenge for, anyone who saw that happen over the last decade or more. I've seen local authorities get things wrong sometimes, but actually on the whole, really innovate and really be closer to the residents that they're trying to support and the residents that they're trying to serve. So I would say probably more power to them.
Deven Ghelani, thanks so much for joining us on the programme tonight. Deven Ghelani is Director of Policy in Practice, and as he was just saying there, he was one of the architects of the Universal Credit Welfare System.